Welcome to our course. This is the Introduction to ICD-10-CM Part 3. Make sure you watch this video if you plan on taking a medical coding certification such as the CPC, CCS, CCSP, and so forth. This video will help you to navigate effectively in the index to diseases, also known as the alphabetic index. By the end of this video, you will be able to navigate through the alphabetic index, also known as the index to diseases, effectively. This is one of the most detailed videos you will see on this topic. Make sure you watch it all the way to the end and make sure you take a lot of notes. Let's discuss the format of the index to diseases, also known as the alphabetic index. This is where all of your coding starts. This is the beginning of the medical coding process, starts right here. Here's a quick student cheat sheet. If I were you, I would pause the screen and take a picture so you can remember these terms, okay? You will need to know these terms to look up your codes properly in your ICD-10-CM book. So take a picture, pause and take a picture, okay? So the main term is the primary word used to search for a diagnosis or condition in the alphabetic index. It's the first term you would use, okay? It's the term that's alphabetized. Is what you're going to use to find your or start your finding of your diagnosis code that you're searching for. You're going to start with the main term. Then you're going to find your subterm, if there is one. Your subterm is indented under the main term, and it provides additional information about that diagnosis code. Then you have a qualifier sometimes. The qualifier word further describes the condition such as severity, location, or complication. It gives more information about the diagnosis. Our diagnoses does not have subterms and qualifiers. It may just have one term, which is the main term. Like for example, if you have anemia and that's all you just have one main term and that would be what you look up. Your main term is never an anatomical site like leg, arm, foot. It's always what's going to be what's wrong with the leg, arm, or foot. So never use anatomical terms to start your diagnosis search. Also, never use the terms acute or chronic. Okay, never, because you're never going to find a diagnosis using those terms as your main term. Cross-reference. Cross-reference gives a direction that tells a coder to look under another term for the correct code. An example of a cross-reference would be see or see also, where you're told when you look up your diagnosis that you need to go see another code or you need to go see another diagnosis or go see another another term. You just need to go somewhere else. See also or see. If you see that, follow the direction to find the proper code. Again, coding begins in the alphabetic index, which is also known as the index to diseases. You're going to identify that main term that we spoke about. Then you're going to review over all the subterms and see if any of those subterms are the one you're looking for. So you're going to look for this through the subterms. Then after you look at the subterms, you'll find the one you're looking for. You're going to find the qualifier if there's one to further specify that code. Then you're going to follow any cross references if necessary. Then after you get your code, you're going to verify your codes in the tabular list. The tabular list is going to give you additional information about that code. It's going to let you know if that code is complete, if you need additional characters, if there's additional guidelines you need to follow. That information is in your tabular list. You never will skip this step. Always go to your tabular list. Here's an example. The epigastric abdominal mass is an example of a diagnosis that a patient could possibly have. Okay. And in this scenario, the main term is going to be mass. And the reason the mass is the main term is because it's what's wrong with the epigastric abdominal area. It has a mass in it. So your main term is mass. Then you need to find more information. Okay, so to further specify this code, because you got to code to the highest degree of specificity. So you look up mass, and then the next term is going to be your subterm, which is the abdominal. And then you have a qualifier here, which is epigastric, and you get the code R19.00. If you want to pause the screen right now and go in your ICD-10-CM book and look up epigastric abdominal mass, please do so. You're going to start with the term mass, which is what's wrong with that epigastric abdominal area, then go to abdominal, and then go to epigastric to get your code. Now, I will say a lot of times when you're coding for diagnoses that have three terms, you usually start with the term that's on the right-hand side. That's just a little trick I've learned. Like for this example here, you're going to start with mass, and then you're going to go from right to left. Then your second term is abdominal, and then your third term is epigastric. I'm not saying this is for all codes, but a lot of times, if you have more than two terms, this is how you're going to find your code. Okay, so here's another example of a patient that's diagnosed with anemia. If you look in your actual code book, which you can pause and do, go to the term anemia, you'll see that it looks exactly like this with these subterms listed right under it. Subterms are always indented like two spaces under the main term, by the way. And then you'll have like under the subterms, you'll have like sometimes indentations, like two indentations over for qualifiers. That's what they're called. So, yeah, so more indented over a code is getting, the more specific that code is becoming. So, like if you look at this term anemia, you would code D64.9. You see that? You see some terms that are right next to anemia: essential, idiopathic, and primary. These terms are called non-essential modifiers. These words in these parentheses do not affect the code assignment, and that's why they're in the parentheses. So if they're documented, it's not going to change the code. So if a patient was diagnosed with essential anemia, you would code D64.9. Even though it's documented, it doesn't change the code. So as you can see, there's also acute under anemia, which is still D64.9, but the acute is indented two spaces over. That makes that acute term a subterm. So there are times some terms do not affect the code that's assigned, but yeah, it just doesn't. But in most cases, it does. In a lot of cases, it does. But non-essential modifiers never change the code. So if you look at like anemia, aplastic anemia, you'll see like there is a code for it, which is D61.9. So the patient was diagnosed as having aplastic anemia, you will code D61.9. And again, the non-essential modifiers in nextoplastic is not going to change the code. So if the patient came in and they had idiopathic aplastic anemia, you still will code D61.9. Okay. All right. For watching. This is the end of the review. If you guys have any more questions, please feel free to go to our website, which is www.learnmedicalcoding.com.